Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Mike Fu, and today I want to talk about grade inflation. It has a lot of impact on my students and their social and emotional well being and their ability to be successful in life, especially from the academic side. So let's get started. Few key bullets. I'll try to keep things sort of tight. I can talk for a really long time about this stuff, but let's just get started. Grade inflation, just like money, if money inflates, it's worth less. So when grades inflate, they're worth less. So what does a C mean, or what did a C actually mean? So if you actually go back, before the 80s, the 70s, you go back to ask students about the grade of a C. It basically meant average, and that's a qualitative grade, right? The letter C is different than, let's say, 85% out of 100%. But with that said, the letter C meant average. And so if you were to think, hey, I said, hey, you're an average basketball player, or you're an average dancer, you're an average boxer, you're an average cook, I don't think most people, outside of exceptions, would find it terrible or offensive or lose a ton of sleep over it. So when you got a grade of a C in math in, let's say, the 1960s, well, you're not a genius at math, but again, like, you're average, right? It's not terrible. Something changed at some point, and that's what Vietnam has to do with everything. So in the 70s, you had the Vietnam War, and so how does that relate to academics? Well, with the draft occurring, there was an exception to being drafted, and one of the exceptions was going to college. So if I were handing out grades before the Vietnam War, giving somebody a C was, hey, you're average at math. But now, if I give a C to a student, potentially you're basically sending that kid off to war. And so, humans being humans, all of a sudden, some of the C's became B's, some of the B's became A's, and you see that inflation happen. And so, the expectation, the qualitative interpretations of our grades went up. And it was mainly the boomer generation that kind of experienced this. Now, what's very interesting is that the messaging and the perception of their grades just calibrated to that new inflation of the grade. So we have to actually go before the war again. And if you look at, post World War II, the generations before the boomers, they went to the war, and the European economy was decimated. So the United States was in a position to really, fill the void as the world, leading power, right? And with that said, the economy went up by a lot. And so if you're a hardworking person, you benefited a lot from that. And if you're not as hardworking, well, guess what? You also benefited from that. So it's not to take away from people's hard work or excuse people from not working hard. It's more to say that those were factors that people could not control. They could control, if they worked hard, and they could control whether they would go to school and study hard. And so when the boomer generation went to schools and universities in large numbers, they had higher grades because of the inflation in terms of the interpretation of the grade. So all of a sudden, A's and B's were sort of like what you'd want, and anything below a B almost felt unacceptable. It made you feel kind of stupid or something like that. And that's terrible for grades to be like that. There's always going to be some semblance of that, but the thing was, it was elevated during that time. And so the other thing about college is the value of a college degree used to be worth much more. So in general, grades are inflated, but the college degree now is inflated. Before the 90s and going back again, you can look at civil rights, minorities trying to go to college. That degree, that piece of paper, really did mean that you unlocked sort of a gateway to all these opportunities that you would not have if you did not have a college degree. Now, today, I want to make sure the messaging isn't that, oh, you shouldn't go to college. The messaging today is more about that you have to be so much more thoughtful with your signature when you go to college and give 4 years and potentially take out a loan for 6 figures. The return on investment for that piece of paper is no longer as much of a guarantee as it was for the boomer generation. And the thing about the messaging about getting A's, about working hard, about going to a good school, a lot of that still is true, but it needs so much more nuance. You can't just go and pick any major anymore. You can't just say, "Hey, I went to this school with this name, and that piece of paper is just going to be worth it regardless of the loan that I take out." There's so much more thoughtfulness that you have to put in. And the truth is, for many people, college might not be a good option. If you pick the wrong major, you could be coming out with massive debt and not be able to actually make a living. Your college degree might actually become a dead weight. And so that is sort of kind of like my main message about how grade inflation has really had an impact on sort of our current perception of grades. And the other thing is, it's really, really affecting our students' ability to focus on the learning aspect. They're so hung up on the letter grades of A's and B's and going to college because the messaging is not very nuanced. The messaging is just, hey, if you do those things, you're going to be successful because that's what worked for the boomer generation. They have a recipe and a formula that worked for them, but unfortunately, it does not apply with the same magnitude as it did back then as it would today. And that's the whole sort of issue I have with it. I have students taking a bunch of AP classes and honors classes that either they're not interested in, or actually they're kind of, taking classes that they might not be even successful in, but because they have the pressure to get into that college with that name, or to be able to put on these number of AP classes on their transcript, because the demand for college is still really high because of this perception. Colleges right now use your transcript and which classes you take and the grades you get as the main mechanism for their selection. And the problem is, I have students taking classes that they don't care about. They don't care about the actual content that they're learning. They learn how to take shortcuts. They learn anything and everything they could do to get the grade without actually learning the stuff with substance. That actually does happen across the board throughout history, probably. But I think at this point, the prevalence of it is what's kind of scary. It's the quantity of the classes they're taking versus the quality of their learning that is much more lopsided, I believe, than it has been in the past. My observations as a teacher, it's saddening because I want them to succeed, and I don't hold it against them for feeling like they have to do the things that the messaging and the current state of our economy sort of puts them up against, because we don't right now know the exact formula outside of you have to actually think, read, and react. And we're not sure how the economy is. We don't know which majors are, well, we kind of do, but with artificial intelligence coming in and all these different things about the modern world right now that are kind of big variables, it's more important than ever that students learn for the sake of learning, learn for the sake of building character, learn for the sake of building confidence, rather than just having a letter grade. I'm going to end my anecdote with this. Sorry, end this conversation with an anecdote. I had a student a couple of years ago, and he was one of the brightest students in the building, very humble, very just a cool, chill kid. And we were having discussions, and he was just talking about how he got an A on his last test for this other class. And he kind of said, like, hey, Mr. Fu, I'm not even happy that I got an A. He thought he'd be happy, but he didn't. He wasn't. He just said, I feel sad because all I know is that I have to do it all over again, and I have to keep getting A's. And it's at a point where they're not proud. He's not even proud of himself necessarily. It's just become a grind. It's taken all the joy out of learning for him. And he is somebody that likes to learn for the sake of learning. But this added pressure of having to, perform, I think is just so much more prevalent. I see so many more students across the board with that similar sort of dejected mindset. And the more we can help our students understand the system that they're in, the more capable they might be of being able to navigate around it and make the better decisions for themselves. So I hope some of these thoughts might be helpful. I want to continue to grow these ideas and develop them. Lots and lots to talk about when it comes to the state of education and all its many, many, many flaws. So thanks for listening, and I'll catch you around. Good luck.